the big picture is that any government, and certainly a Labour government, is faced with a series of insoluble problems. And those poor, inadequate politicians who are trying to grapple with them are never going to get any recognition for their best efforts. The big one is the trap into which this present government, it's a major blunder and they'll never recover from it, fell into over tax. If you're going to spend money, you've got to raise it in tax. And Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer surrendered that ground well before they were elected. Jeremy Hunt, in an entirely cynical, irresponsible budget cut, first 1% and then 2% more, 3% altogether, off employees' national insurance. Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, I think it was introduced when he was Prime Minister, cut a penny off income tax. Every time they did that, that's another £8 billion going down the drain. And in Hunt's case, it was entirely cynical because he knew, firstly, it was only done in the expectation that they wouldn't be in government come the next election. And had they by any chance been re-elected, he would have had to get back that money. But he then challenged Reeves and Starmer to say, well, would you put it up again? And the obvious answer would have been to say, well, we'll decide what we're going to do if and when we're elected. And by the way, the next election will be about the state of the public services, not about taxation. That's what they should have said. Instead, they ruled out all the three main sources of raising money, and as a result, they're assailed with a list of demands, mostly from good causes for and some very big historic problems, the near collapse of much of local government, for example, and they got no answers because they haven't got the money, and it's coming to a head for Rachel Reeves. I'd be surprised if she survives as Chancellor for the whole of this term. It's a huge mistake, and it will haunt them.
So your argument would be that we want to widen. It's something that seems to have emerged among policy thinkers recently is an expectation that at some point we're going to have to widen the tax base, right? So it can't. There's lots of people on the left think soak the rich, squeeze, until the pips squeak. This tends to go down poorly in government circles who don't want to alienate the rich.
I don't think it's about soaking the rich. And I think those on the left who think that the rich can pay, the top 10% of income taxpayers already pay 60% of the money raised. No, it's actually about the basic rate of taxation. A serious party committed to public expenditure, as Labour's supposed to be, would have had a serious conversation with the electorate about to the effect that taxation, fairly raised and honestly distributed, is the subscription we pay for living in a civilised country. And instead, Rachel Reeves goes on about the tax burden. Now, you can never out-Tory the Tories on tax. Never, never, never. And don't try it. And that's what she tried to do. And she's completely hoist on her own petard now.
I mean, I agree with Chris that Labour put itself in the hole over tax. I think maybe where I don't agree is on the top rate of tax. I mean, as obviously we know, the top rate of tax for most of the Thatcher government was 60%. So, there's been plenty of times in British history where the economy has grown with a much higher rate of tax than we have now. And I think it's evident in the kind of texture of British life that the wealthy people have had a fantastic 30 or 40 years. I was clearing out my parents' old house in Gloucestershire a couple of years ago in a town that was not particularly wealthy, and I hadn't been there for a bit. And I was like, oh, God, virtually every car is a Range Rover in this town now. Virtually every restaurant has £30 main dishes on the menu. And I think there's been an explosion of wealth. I mean, Thomas Piketty and other people have written about this. And I don't think that's enough, but I think that Britain would still have a pretty viable economy with a top rate of tax of 50% instead of 45%. That 50% is much closer to the kind of European average.
Andy, that wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't raise sufficient money. That's why you've got to go for the basic rate. Successive chancellors, and Gordon Brown started this, cut the basic rate from 22 to 20% in return for a round of applause that lasted barely 2 days. And that alone cost, another 7, 8, 9, 10 billion recurring. And then other chancellors have emulated it since. Rishi Sunak was talking about cutting it to 16%. That is the core problem. There are things you can do as regards the rich. You could have a couple more bans on council tax, for example. I wouldn't attempt to reform council tax because many governments will die in that ditch. But you could put another couple of bans on that without much protest, I would have said.
Or you could have capital gains tax on people making huge windfall profits on selling their homes. If people sell their homes in an area like where I live and make a huge profit, essentially because of gentrification and transport infrastructure being improved with public money, why shouldn't they pay 10% tax on that profit? They'd still make a huge profit. I mean, I think in income terms, maybe there's a limit to what you can raise. But I think in asset terms, there's been an absolute explosion. I mean, Philip Collins, who's hardly the world's biggest lefty, Tony Blair's ex-speechwriter, wrote a very good piece, I think it was in Prospect a year or two ago, saying that essentially he was pro-wealth taxes. And he said this is creating huge problems for future generations, all this essentially untaxed wealth cascading down the generations and blocking out opportunity for other people and so on. And I thought it was a well-argued piece. I think there's a limit to how much you can get from the rich, but Britain has a lot of very rich people in it. I mean, we're not just talking about 20,000 people here. We're talking about a lot of people who are earning, and when I say rich, I mean earning over 100,000, 150,000, which is rich compared to most people. And I think a lot of those people would happily pay a bit more tax. A lot of those people still vote Labour. Yeah. So,
yeah, I mean, I thought there was some interesting work recently that points out that the wealthy are voting Labour in ways that are historically very, very unusual. Some of it tracks with education, for instance.
I mean, this partly comes back to the kind of communications issues we were discussing earlier. But if I were a loyal Labour MP sitting here, what I'd say is the Labour government has done various things that are functionally wealth taxes by not even by other names. It's a private school VAT, non-dom, changes to inheritance tax, and you could even construe the winter fuel changes as a form of wealth tax, and they have not gone down well. And so, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to particularly the assets argument that Andy was just making. I personally think that would be a very good idea, but I'm also I think there's a lot of kind of panacea language comes from the left about just do a wealth tax and we'll, and sort of people making arguments about it. I'm personally of the view that there is a good sort of like you're with us or against us moralistic argument for the wealth tax, and it would be good politics. I'm less convinced that it would be good economics, or it would be good economics, but I'm less convinced that it would be like totalizingly good economics.